Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of Panther Weekly. I'm Tyler Kuehl alongside Cooper Weidenthaler for Davenport Athletics. Cooper, we are obviously here in the middle of a pandemic, but yet we're here to still talk about sports. In particular today, we're speaking on the gridiron, Davenport football.
Yeah, you mentioned pandemic. We don't get to watch any sports right now, so we have to talk about them and kind of wait for everything to settle down. But yeah, Davenport football, a couple streaky seasons the past couple years. Last year, they won their first 3 games, then lost 5 in a row, and then won their last 2. So very streaky. 2 years ago, they won their first 6 and then didn't win another game. So just trying to find that consistency throughout the regular season, that's been the biggest thing for Sparky McEwen and his football team.
Yeah, you talk about wins over Lake Erie, Northern Michigan, Lindenwood, but then just kind of running the really tough part of the schedule. You're running teams like Ferris State, who went to the national semis, and Grand Valley State, who's always been a top 25 team in Division II. It's not like the GLIAC is an easy schedule, though, for Davenport, and that's kind of the hard part here in their first few years here in Division II.
Yeah, obviously the top is pretty heavy with Ferris and Grand Valley, but you got to worry about everybody in this conference. You mentioned those last 2 wins, though, were against Saginaw on the road, which might have been the key win all season, and then they ended the regular season with a win against Northwood. Saginaw and Northwood, 2 teams they'd never beaten before in the 2 previous years, so 2 big wins, a way to end the schedule nicely for Sparky.
And those were 2 games I remember a couple of years ago that Northwood and Saginaw Valley State, just going up over into that part of the state. It's always just tough for some teams in the GLIAC because they are so good. But, I mean, that's just, I guess you talk about how good the GLIAC is up and down, because it always seems like you just find guys that end up in the pros because every team is so talented. But, of course, talking about last season, you had a tough loss at home against Michigan Tech, and then you lose to Ashland on the road despite that highlight reel touchdown for DeAndre Ford, that 99-yard touchdown pass. It is a thing of consistency, and you wonder what Sparky McEwen says to his team to try to get them refocused. Obviously, it was enough to end the season on a high note.
Yeah, right. So ended it on a high note with those last 2 wins. Even outside of GLIAC play, they beat Lindenwood, a team out of Missouri that made the playoffs. We'd never beaten an NCAA playoff team before until Lindenwood. So I think some of it is just getting up for the good teams and staying up for the teams that you should beat still. So, and keeping that mentality throughout the season.
And this is still a relatively young program. I mean, Sparky, like you said, is going into his 4th year as head coach, and we'll get to the interview with Ryan Thompson a little bit later on. But, trying to build a team, I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it's hard for especially a program that went straight into Division II to go up against a lot of these tough teams. And Davenport is making steps. They're staying above 500, which I'm sure there's a lot of programs up there that would love to be in that position that Davenport's in.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it's his 4th season for Sparky McEwen, the head coach. The program had only existed for 1 year before Sparky, so he inherited a brand new program, and with COVID and restrictions and recruiting is as tough as ever. So the biggest part of football, any college sport, is recruiting, is getting bodies in here, getting talent in here. And Sparky's having a tough time, as is any coach in America. But recruiting is huge, so he's just facing a lot of challenges, but I know he's up for them, definitely.
It'll definitely be interesting to see how it goes into this season, whenever it may start. But let's talk a little about last season. Let's start with probably the most important position. Let's start under center or in the shotgun, depending on how you're on your offense. Hayden Majewski and DeAndre Ford. Those guys, they kind of split time a little bit last season. DeAndre Ford was the presumptuous preseason number 1 starter. Majewski took over for a little bit, and both of them had solid numbers. Majewski kind of outdoing him just a little bit. 6 touchdowns, though, for Majewski. 7 passing touchdowns, for DeAndre Ford. Both quarterbacks looked pretty good at points during the season for DU.
Yeah, last 2 seasons, DeAndre was the starter at the beginning of the season, but both years he suffered an injury. Both times, Hayden stepped in, played very well, but Hayden is gone, so DeAndre doesn't really have that great backup. We'll see what they've brought in and who we'll see playing time if DeAndre goes down or if he doesn't play well. But DeAndre is definitely the guy, the super senior, 5th-year senior, and Hayden is gone as the backup. So DeAndre will have to step it up big time.
Don't they call him like Grandpa or whatever because he is the old man on the team?
Yeah.
He's been around for, it seems like, half a decade.
Right, yeah, he's been around a long time, but you'd definitely like to see that out of your quarterback. If any position you'd like to have a lot of experience, quarterback is one of them, definitely.
That would definitely be for sure. And, of course, he had a lot of great targets last season. Nate Couturier, Keon Powers, Deronte Powers, Johnson, all those guys were doing well. I mean, you talk about Couturier, 549 yards, leading the team in receiving yards. I mean, he was probably the bread and butter, not just on offense, but on special teams as well as a punt returner.
Yeah, Nate Couturier was the top receiver. He was an academic All-American, so he was doing it on the field and off. Very good academics. But, yeah, 4 of the 5 receivers that caught a touchdown pass are gone.
Yep.
And we'll talk about the one that's coming back. We'll get to him in a second. But Couturier, Keon Powers, Marquion Johnson, and Deronte Powers are all gone, as well as your leading rusher. Now, this team offensively struggled, offensively and definitely rushing and catching. Didn't have a ton of yards, but he was still the number one back, and he's gone. So offensively, they lost a lot of weapons.
And you talk about just going up against teams like Grand Valley State, because those are relatively tough teams. And sometimes, I mean, getting a touchdown in Allendale at Lubber Stadium, and it's always a tough place to play, except for unless you're Ferris State, who just seems to win there every year now. Now I say that now, my buddy Harrison Watt's going to call me and he said, you jinxed us. Rob Bentley's going to get mad at me. But let's go now to Ryan Thompson, because he was able to talk with the coach and a couple of players there, Cooper.
Yeah, Ryan Thompson, assistant AD for communications, our boss, the one, the only. He spoke with the head coach, Sparky, and he also spoke to a couple of defensive players, junior Jalen Robinson and a redshirt senior, Patrick McMahon. So, Ryan, take it away.
Hello, Davenport Panther fans. This is Ryan Thompson, Assistant AD for Athletic Communications. And we're getting things going this fall, even though things are a little bit different with the football interview. We've got head coach Sparky McEwen. We're also joined today by Jalen Robinson, a junior from Oak Park High School here in Michigan, and Patrick McMahon, a senior from Inverness, Illinois. First, Sparky, we'll start with you. What has been your day-to-day operations since the beginning of the month and classes have resumed?
Well, it's always a challenge because, you have to take, each day, as itself. And, with the pandemic being so fluid, our players understand that, we could stop, certain things at a certain time due to the COVID. So we have a plan that's obviously in place. But it could change at any time, so I could tell you the plan that we have in place. We had player development, we had player meetings, we obviously have position meetings, but a lot of that, it changes depending on where we are with the governor orders or university orders and things like that. So it's very challenging, to say the least, Ryan, but our guys know this year, our motto has been strictly business before the pandemic even hit. So now that's being challenged more so now than ever.
What's been your response with you and the coaching staff, and how have you been able to keep the players motivated without a fall schedule?
One of the things that's very challenging, one of the things when we recruited these guys is that, there were certain type of individuals we were looking for, certain character, and individuals that we were looking for, that we know what our vision is. And believe it or not, Ryan, you should remember this, but when I took the job, one of my hashtags was 2020. And the 2020, it had more, people would say, well, is that about winning championships? And I said, well, if that happens to be part of it, that's one thing, but that's not what 2020 meant to us. 2020 was about clear vision. And, we would never discuss that publicly. It was within our team. We've kept hashtag 2020, but it just so happens that all of a sudden we're in the middle of a pandemic in 2020. But, if you take that definition and you read it to a T for what we wanted, we're prepared. We're ready to move forward. If the GLIAC came back and said that we were going to start up football here next week, I'll guarantee you one thing: these football players would be ready to jump in and roll right now. That's kind of been our mindset. So it's been a challenge, man. I'm not going to sit here and act like it hasn't been. These are guys from ages of 18 up to 26. And there's a lot of other things that can be going on, but they know that they're here to get an education and they're here to prepare themselves to fight for championship in the GLIAC.
You referenced the GLIAC a little bit. Has there been any discussions that you've been on with other coaches about what the spring season might look like? Or I know like other leagues like the Big Ten have decided to kind of change course. So has there been any discussions on that as well?
Yes, we've had a lot of discussions, and it's just that right now there are discussions, to the credit of the GLIAC and the commissioner and the ADs and the presidents, everyone's on board to do something in the spring. We haven't nailed it down entirely just because of the pandemic itself, because we're just trying to get a hold of the direction this thing is going to go into, so I'm proud, that our GLIAC are handling things the way they are right now because they're being very careful, as well as our university, and our guys understand that because even before the pandemic hit, we've always talked about our boys' health being first. They get that. We're gonna have tough men we're going to work with tough men. At the same time, though, we want to work safely, and we want to make sure we're positive as we can be in light of a pandemic.
If you do have spring football, which everyone hopes you do, what'll be some of your strategies? I know some programs and some things have been said about maybe I would hold out certain players because they would like to play again in that fall, even though the student athletes won't lose any eligibility if they play in the spring. But is there a strategy to what kind of players you'll put out there in the spring?
Well, for us, it's a little different than anybody else because we're still a young program. I think Grand Valley's going into this year celebrating their 51st year, and you got programs like Ferris and Saginaw. I think they're in their 100th season or something like that. This will be, I think, the 5th year of for the Davenport Panthers. So we're still developing. And then when it comes to transfers, these guys have to be developed as well. It's not easy for our transfers to come in and play like they did 2 years ago. We got guys that we've been grooming, that we recruited, like Jalen himself, that these, I think he was part of our, first recruiting class, maybe second. Yes, he's part of our first. All of a sudden, here's a guy that we recruited in our first class. He was our defensive MVP last year. So it goes to show you the type of guys that we're going after, because we generally go after and want to groom kids for 4 years. But we also know that the transfers are able to come in and bridge the gap if we have a talent fall off there. So for us, attacking the spring, it's going to be more developmental. I'll be playing a lot more guys than what I would normally play, but that's okay. That's okay. Our guys have come here to get an education and play football, and playing football is what we want to do in the spring.
Sure. And now switching gears to Jalen Robinson. First of all, congratulations on being named GLIAC All-Academic Team last fall. How important is balancing school and football for you?
Well, it's very important. Here at Davenport, you have to have a certain GPA to even get on the field. So I find that's something I strive on since high school, actually. Yeah.
Second question I have for you, Jalen, is, you were honorable mention all GLIAC last year. That coach said the team defensive MVP. You were second on the team in tackles with 68. What was the biggest change for you to make that jump after your freshman year?
I think it was just experience, just getting on the field, things slowing down. When I first got to Davenport, it's a step faster than high school. So you just have to find that experience and get your feet wet. And that's what I did my freshman year. And after that, I was ready to roll.
Awesome. And then the last question for you, how have you been able to stay in shape, both mentally and physically, during the pandemic?
Well, with the pandemic, it's just every day has its own individual challenges. Like Coach Sparky said, you have to just be able to adapt to all situations. And every day I just been putting my schoolwork aside and putting my athletics aside as well. Getting workouts in, doing film and things like that. Just being able to separate them and balance out.
That's fantastic. Patrick, for you, you've battled injuries over the years here at Davenport, but remained a key component on defense. What has that journey been like to persevere and get back on the field?
For me, honestly, it's been super hard because there's nothing more that I want than to play every Saturday, every down that I possibly can. But I know that my role is also a leader on the team. And so being able to grab guys and say, hey, let's get it done this way. And then also being able to prepare the people who are next in line in order to step up and make that transition.
Absolutely. You've been named GLIAC All-Academic Excellence. That's those individuals with a GPA of over 3.5 here at Davenport. How difficult is it for you to maintain high grades and still put in the required time for football?
It is a little bit difficult, but it's one of those things where right after practice is done, I usually sit down for a few hours and do my homework, and I try to get ahead in all my classes prior to everything. And then I'm always talking to my teammates about, hey, make sure you guys are getting your stuff done. We're keeping each other accountable, and that's what I love so much about this team.
Yeah, and the final question I have for you, you talked about the team and communicating with them. What's the morale been like on the team, considering the turbulent times we are experiencing?
Honestly, we have high hopes here. Like, honestly, everything's been very difficult. We would have loved to have played this season, and we would have been ready to regardless. but everyone's viewing it as this is a year to get our bodies right, to get everyone experienced, to get everyone talking. We have freshmen, and it's, hey, freshmen, like, we've all been through this. Like, here's the experience we bring to the table. Here's things you can be working on. So whether that's messaging into our group chat saying, this is the workout I did today, let's see someone else follow this or one up it, and then we're taking Snapchat videos and sending it to each other and saying, this is what I did. So it's kind of competitive among that nature. So the morale is just going up and up because we're all competing still.
Hey, I really appreciate all three of you guys jumping on here with me today. Certainly miss football, miss those Saturdays in the fall, and hopefully we'll get to see you guys back on the field in the spring. And for everything else for DU athletics and for football in particular, you can visit dupanthers.com and follow us on social media.
Thank you very much, Ryan. And Cooper, we didn't talk about it much off the top, about the defense that has been probably Davenport's bread and butter over the years. Had a lot of great players, and that was including Jalen Robinson.
Yeah, last season they were top 3 in the GLIAC in scoring defense, rushing defense, and passing defense. So very good. That's kind of what they hung their hat on last season. And 3 big names coming back. You've already seen 2 of them talk to you. Jalen Robinson, junior defensive back, kind of a linebacker as well, kind of a hybrid there, will come down towards the line as well. And then redshirt senior defensive lineman Patrick McMahon, and a third name, Brendan Bowman. I know you want to talk a little bit about him. I'll throw it back to you, and then we'll give him some detail.
Well, I mean, he's a guy that's a little bit interesting. He's a guy that started his career at Central Michigan, his collegiate career, that is, and he's kind of a TJ or a JJ Watt kind of guy, where the fact that he started off his career, ironically, at Central Michigan, and he started off as a tight end, then became a defensive lineman, and became one of Davenport's best defensive linemen last year. 5 sacks, which was second on the team, and also 6.5 tackles for loss. He's a guy that gets in the backfield, causes a lot of havoc, and obviously Sparky loves to have him back as a redshirt junior.
Yeah, used to be on the other side of the ball as well. He made the switch from tight end to defensive line, played in all 10 games last season, and you mentioned it, 6.5 tackles for loss for a total of 29 yards lost, and also had 14 total tackles. So 6'3", 235, big kid, right here at Grand Rapids is where he's from, Catholic Central High School. But the Watt comparison is really good. He's a big kid, and he'll see a much larger role this season with Robert Clanton, who was All-League, All-American last season. And he has gone out the door because of graduation, but Brendan Bowman will be expected to step up on the defensive line.
And that's the thing about Sparky's teams, though. Sparky likes to have a defensive team, especially when you're going up against a lot of talented offenses here in the GLIAC. You need to have defense first. Defense wins championships, but there's going to be a little bit of a different kind of look for Panther fans when they go out and watch the Panthers next season with their offense. They do still have DeAndre Ford, the veteran back there, calling the signs, but there's a few new faces coming up with the receiving and the running backs. But that said, there's a couple guys that are going to be trying to catch balls this year, and that's going to be guys like Cody Blankenberg and Ulysses Gillard, who had that 99 touchdown yard pass against Ashland last season. Those 2 guys, probably the 2 best receivers returning from last season.
Yeah, Gillard, aside from those top 4 receivers that all left, those were the only receivers that caught passes that left. So the only one returning that got in the end zone, receiving-wise, is Gillard. Caught 2 touchdowns last year, played all 10 games, made 6 starts. Again, a much larger role. So guys that haven't played a lot, maybe haven't seen the field as much as they would have liked, they're going to have to step up. When you lose talent, when you lose yards, other guys have to step up. So Gillard's coming back, and Cody Blankenberg as well, another receiver out of Lansing, Gillard out of Orlando, Florida. So those 2 receiving core-wise, again, I've said it already a couple times, but are going to have to step up. You got to replace yardage.
And, of course, obviously not just receiving yards, but rushing yards as well. Lorenzo White last year leading the team with rushing yards, was averaging around 4 yards a carry as a freshman. But, of course, you also have Seth Acta as well, who led the team a couple of years ago. Those are 2 guys that are probably going to get a big workload in this season.
Yeah, Lorenzo White. Lendell White was our comparison. A big guy, not tall, carries a lot of weight when he's running towards the line, runs downhill, played in 8 games last year, made 2 starts. He'll be in the backfield as well as Seth Acta. And Acta hasn't played since 2018, so he comes back. He's a redshirt senior out of California, and White out of Detroit. So those 2 will be in the backfield, much larger role. Mentioned losing Michael Ketching. He was the top rusher from a year ago, so he's gone. And Acta and White, again, much larger role for those 2.
And, of course, the guy's going to be hopefully plowing the way for them, Kent Columber and Shane Shannon leading the offensive line as well. It's going to be an interesting look because the offense at times for Davenport last year really shined, but then again, against some of the tougher teams, had a little bit of trouble against them. I mean, and you just wonder sometimes how long, it's Davenport, what's their consistency going to be like? And it's going to be interesting to see, but, of course, like we said about the offensive line, those big guys up front are going to be incredibly important for the Panthers.
Yeah, Kent Columber and Shane Shannon. Columber, senior 6'3", 305 out of Phoenix, Arizona, and Shane Shannon, he's a grad student, so already got his degree, 6 foot, 300-pounder out of Lansing. So those two will be the big dogs, the big eaters, I should say, up on the offensive line. They will be counted on heavily to clear paths for those two running backs and also give protection to DeAndre. So DeAndre has faced a lot of heat. When he's played, he's gotten a lot of pressure from the defensive line. So offensive line will have to step up, give DeAndre time, and then if DeAndre gets time, everything else is going to work. It starts with the rushing game. DeAndre gets time to pass, everything will work out. But offensive line needs to set the tone.
He definitely has the arm to do so. So what would the expectations be for Davenport? Do we want to? If you're Sparky, do you keep saying, hey, we're at least finishing 500, or is he looking forward and say, hey, let's get above 500 and let's start competing for a playoff spot? What do you think Sparky's expectations are going into this season?
I think the expectation is to see who can step up first and foremost because he lost a lot of talent. But 2018, they started 6-0. 2019, they started 3-0. You don't want to go less there. You want to continue to have good starts and just find consistency. And I talked about it a little bit in the first segment before the interview. But if there's a team that you feel like you should beat, you have to play as well as you would against a really good team. So no matter who you're playing against, no matter what their record is, you've got to bring it every time, especially in this conference.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one. We don't even know what the schedule is even going to look like, so we don't know how the outlook's going to be for next season. But when we do hit the field, hopefully soon, hopefully in the spring, we'll definitely see some of the best Panther football anyone can see. Of course, we got to thank our sponsors today: Plumbers Disposal Service, Cook's Drive-In, Frontier Heating and Cooling, Katterberg and Verhaeg, DeVries Companies, and Premier Family Eye Care. Thank you very much, folks, for tuning in for this first episode of Panther Weekly. We got a lot of great shows coming up here, Cooper. We're going to talk about all the teams.
Jets Pizza, too.
Jets Pizza. Oh, you can never forget Jets Pizza. There's always great pizzas, but Jets Pizza. When you want to get pizza, you get Jets, because Jets is the best. Oh, my gosh. I should be their marketing guy.
That was good.
Anyways, for Tyler Kuehl, for Cooper Weidenthaler, thank you very much. We'll see you all next week here on Panther Weekly.